The Journey to the West, it was or is still very much the one of the most popular novels that ever came out of China. It was written in the 16th century in the Ming Dynasty. It was an era when China was prosperous. It was making a lot of money. Everybody was happy, and it was a time that everybody flourished. And it was a time that publishing became very famous as well. Now, you might say that, well, the Chinese invented paper, so that's why they published a lot of books. Well, yes, but at the same time, what they figured out was how to create paperbacks and make the books really cheap. So when Westerners, Europeans, would go over to China and they say, "Wow, these books, they were amazed at how inexpensive they were and how accessible they were to everybody." And so it was a time of popular culture where that was the main entertaining form for the people to read novels. And so A Journey to the West started as 100. It has 100 chapters. Yeah, 100 chapters in the novel. And throughout history, it's been filmed many times, and we'll get to that later. But the book contains basically four parts. It has 100 chapters, and the first chapter talks about the Monkey King and how he grew up and how he attained power, and he became a deity, became a god. Okay, but he angered the gods, and so they punished him. They put him under a mountain for 500 years. And so, at any rate, the main story basically deals with a Buddhist monk, Tripatanka, who has three disciples, and the bulk of the story involves a pilgrimage for them to go to India to get the original Buddhist scriptures, yeah, and bring it back to China to inspire people. Okay, so basically that's the journey, and along the way, they encounter a lot of like monsters and demons that wants to eat Trepatenka, and the Monkey King and the two disciples, Sandy and Pixie, the three disciples' role is to protect him. And so it's a fable, it's a fairy tale. It is based on a real pilgrimage by the Buddhist monk Tripatanka, but of course there's no demons and monsters and no Monkey King. I think it was the mythology is that I think along his journey, there was a monkey in the wild that followed him for a bulk part of the journey, I think. And so, and I don't know, these rumors started. I mean, this is from the 16th century, so we don't really know exactly what really happened. But what came out of it for the Hong Kong and the Chinese and all of Asia is a very popular, well-loved, beloved story that people are still filming today. The stories were so beloved, and popular that people were entertained as well as enlightened, as they read the stories. And so it became so popular that filmmakers, starting in the 1920s. The first version, I think, came out in 1927. It was a silent film because the story itself is very visual. It has a strong sense of story within it, and so and there's like 100 chapters, right? So the filmmakers really took, you can't film 100 chapters of content, right? Not even for a TV series. They tried, but the filmmakers, they realized that it's an open area. It's like Star Wars, right? The universe the story world is so large that they could just take a small chunk of it. For instance, a Chinese Odyssey is actually just a prequel of Journey of the West. In fact, it doesn't cover the journey at all. You know, in fact, the ending is the beginning of the journey to India, and so the filmmakers could really pick and choose what kind of story they want to tell. You know, you can choose one that is basically all action where the demons chase after the monk and the Monkey King, and they have this epic battle because the Monkey King is supposed to be uh, a master in kung fu. He could beat anybody, and so that, you know, it could initiate a whole series of action pictures just based on Journey of the West. On the other hand, you have the spiritual side of the story where we learn that the story is about how human suffering in the world could amass to how we live our lives and to let go of everything. You know, so Buddhism, the ideas of Taoism, Buddhism is heavily embedded in these stories. And so you get the moral of the story after, you know, you see it, read the stories or see the films. So it's perfect as a film story.
孫悟空，你本來應承如來佛祖護送你師傅唐三藏去取西經嘅，而家你竟然想夾埋牛魔王嚟食咗你師傅？八婆！
So the Journey of the West has been translated, adapted to screen many times since the beginning of the movies. The first one, I believe, was 1927. It was a silent film called The Cave of the Silken Web. So throughout the years, yes, there have been many others, but the more important ones are, well, the Japanese film studios adapted the Monkey King story many times as well. But I think more importantly, the Shaw Brothers studios made some interesting ones in the 60s. Monkey Goes West, Princess Orange Fan, Cave of the Silken Web again. So throughout the 60s, they made several. Jen Che, director Jen Che made one. The Fantastic Magic Baby, I think it was called. So it has a long history, okay, in the Chinese cinema. And so when Stephen Chow made a Chinese Odyssey with Jeffrey Lau in 1995, the two-part epic movie, that was, I think, the first Monkey King story of that era. And they made it very special because they, you know, put in their own brand to it. In fact, you know, as we know, Stephen Chow is really almost obsessed with this story because he remade it again later on as a director twice. You know, directed one and then produced and wrote the other, and we'll get to that later. But after Stephen Chow, there's also been many Journey to the West stories as well. Aaron Kwok made one with basically a CGI movie. In fact, that series was very popular because it spawned like 3 sequels after, so that's interesting. There's so many stories, abundant stories within the text. You could film 1,000 stories from it, you know, all different variations of it, and you could loosely based on it as long as you know, stick to the, you know, the loose structure of the pilgrimage to India to get the scriptures, and, you know, between there are a lot of demons and monsters that go after them, and so the stories could be endless. It could be very, you know, as a fantastical movie, it's fun. You know, it's like Harry Potter. You could basically go on forever.
追蹤我3日3夜，見你嘅女人打你，我以為我怕咗你。悟空，你點可以同觀音姐姐咁講嘢呢？咪做！你又嚇我。
Stephen Chow, in the movie A Chinese Odyssey, was probably the pinnacle point of his acting career. per se. He started his stardom started in early 90s. I believe well, he was popular and famous on TV with a number of comedy shows that he did in TVB in Hong Kong. And then Danny Lee, the actor producer, signed him to be his manager. Okay, and so in the next 5 years, from the 90s on, he made a lot of successful comedies. All for the Winners, Dosing, where he plays the gambling. It was like sort of like a sequel to God of Gamblers. That was pretty interesting, and it made him a big star, right? And then he did a slew of comedies. They were all very, very popular. Box office wise, they were, very high. When I worked with him for a Magnificent Scoundrels, at the time he was like shooting 4 films at the same time. That's how popular he was as an actor. And so A Chinese Odyssey came after, I think, to me, one of my favorite movies of his, which is called From Beijing with Love. That was in 1994, and then The Two Chinese Odyssey was a year after that. And so I think at that time he could do no wrong. In fact, he would make a lot of comedies that are not that good into very successful box office success. So, yeah, he became an icon in Hong Kong. People loved him for his attitude for comedy, his brand of comedy, Mo Lei Tao, which kind of translates nonsense comedy. But, I think it's not that nonsense, because if you look at American comedies like the Zucker brothers were making, like, airplanes and Naked Gun, and it's that type of humor. It's stupid, but it's funny. But if you think again, it's really not that stupid. It's quite clever, the comedies that he comes up with. And all of this basically is largely by in way of delivering the dialogue, saying things that don't make sense, but it's funny at the same time. So I think the Western audience might lose a little bit in translation when they see it, but that's why his latter films gained much more popularity in Kung Fu, Shaolin Soccer, because they were more physical comedies, right? So, but it is the Mo Lei Tao dialogue that he delivers that made him famous in the beginning of his career, and so that's where that whole, if you look at his filmography, it's basically all comedies in the 90s, and they're all very funny. You don't have to think too much about it, and just you just have a good time watching his movies.
算由金剛不壞之神，10個觀世音都唔怕。
Surprisingly, A Chinese Odyssey Part 1 and 2 were not that successful at the time of release. That's mainly due to Stephen Chow's audience expect him to be in the screen all the time, saying funny things, and it's non-stop humor, funny movies, right? So when it comes to A Chinese Odyssey, in a way, it's a gamble for Stephen Chow because it is funny some parts, or some parts are just so funny, but it has a very serious, dramatic story within as well, and quite touching as well, right? It's not one of the first Stephen Chow dramatic movies. He started in drama, actually, before he went into this Mo Lei Tao nonsense, funny dialogue deliveries. But A Chinese Odyssey was, a little bit geared towards the dramatics, right? And so audience weren't ready for that, I think. And because it was just loosely based on Journey to the West. Now, in the original Journey to the West, the Monkey King was just, trapped under a mountain for 500 years. In a Chinese Odyssey, they changed it, whereas the Buddha made the Monkey King into a human, so he learns, how humans suffer, and then, he would reincarnate into the Monkey King again. And so that is, a departure of the original text. But in spirit, it is still the same. And it's quite dramatic. The ending of the story is not a funny, laugh out loud comedy show. And so people were surprised. But over the years, obviously, audiences grow and they mature. And like all of Stephen Chow movies, we go back again and again to revisit once in a while. Not once in a while, once a year, basically, because they play Stephen Chow movies during Chinese New Year's, right? Every year. and so as the audience mature, they see this movie again, and I think the love of these two movies really grew over the years. And a credit to Stephen Chow comedies. Most comedies you could see maybe a couple times and you kind of get sick of it. But for some reason, Stephen Chow movies has the highest rewatch values of any movies in existence. So it's not surprising. A lot of people, my friends included, have the Stephen Chow collection at home. They can watch it anytime. A Chinese Odyssey was directed by Jeffrey Lau. Now, everybody knows Stephen Chow has this Molei Tao, nonsense comedy delivery dialogue that, everybody knows that or thinks that he invented. But to me, I think Jeffrey Lau was the guy who came up with the nonsense, comedy deliveries, Molei Tao. His previous movies is evident to that. Namely, the ones that he did with Leung Ga-fai, Tony Leung, Hak Mui Guai, I believe that was the name of the movie, where basically all the actors were, being very, very nonsensical. Now, Jeffrey Lau is a giant filmmaker in Hong Kong, okay? He started his career as a screenwriter, and I think he partnered with Wong Kar-wai a lot. Like he did, they wrote movies like The Flaming Brothers with Chow Yun-fat in the 80s, the mobster movies. And later on, when Wong Kar-wai became a director, Jeffrey continued to write with him or for him. I think As Tears Go By, Chungking Express, basically all the early Wong Kar-wai movies were partnered with Jeffrey Lau. And so you can see, wow, they were the dynamic duo in terms of creativity in Hong Kong. So I think later on they parted to do their own thing, and Jeffrey Lau continued to do movies like A Chinese Odyssey. I think there are two things that Jeffrey Lau and Stephen Chow are obsessed with. One is Bruce Lee, and the other is the Journey to the West. For Bruce Lee, they did A Fist of Fury together, a remake or a spoof together. There was a sequel as well, A Fist of Fury 1 and 2. And so you could see that Jeffrey Lau obviously had a big influence on Stephen Chow, and vice versa, I believe. Now, I didn't get to work with Jeffrey in my career, but his reputation was huge. Yeah, everybody respected him in the industry, and I think in a way that he may not be the most box office success director like Wang Jing is, but everybody would agree that he was the most creative filmmaker at the time.
黑咗我抽菩提子，
冇啊，我冇啊！
咁我抽菩提子喺邊？
我咪你嘅執菩提子咯！哎呀，
大聲啲！
我咪你嘅執菩提子咯！
點解你唔係蘋果嘅菩提子？
你唔好以為我唔夠你打喎。
He's actually a very good actor as well. His comedic timing is quite good. In A Chinese Odyssey, he's the grape to Stephen Chow, and the scenes with him are also quite funny. Yeah, so yeah, he could do it all, and I think he is one of our best in Hong Kong. In recent years, in the last 10 years or so, he's been making films in China. So I hope he comes back to Hong Kong and make another film soon.
吹個波，吹個大個波，跌咗嘢啊！師弟，收埋佢哋。
點解係我啊？
因為我本領高強嘅你。
There's an interesting aspect of A Chinese Odyssey is which there is an ensemble cast. A lot of big names in these two movies. And so I think it benefited the movie. And I think it also gave Chow an inspiration on how to do his latter films. Okay. Because before that, most movies that he did in the early 90s were basically a one-man show. You know, everybody went to just to see him. And again, that might be the reason why A Chinese Odyssey was not that popular initially. It's because like, well, who are these other actors, right? But the thing is, the comedy was spread out amongst other actors to do well. I mean, there's this one part that involves singing an English song that would just crack you up. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I wanted to say that other actors brought on the comedy as well. You know, so it wasn't solely rely on Stephen to do that. And so in A Chinese Odyssey, I think the Stephen Chow world just, you know, really got a lot bigger and, you know, in terms of scope and storytelling. And I suspect A Chinese Odyssey would be more popular than his other comedies in the early 90s due to the fact that, well, it's from the journey to the West, and so that is a timeless classic, and so that will last forever. And also the fact that the world, you know, the story world is populated by a lot of interesting characters, not just Stephen Chow, and so that's what makes it more fun in the movie, I think.
我真係唔得啦，你唔好再。我睇老闆嚟話你真係，我已經話咗唔得噶啦，你仲要咁嘅，你完全唔理我幾咁難受嘅你，你唔好再煩我，我一嘢懟死你。
Stephen Chow is forever one of the most popular actors in Hong Kong, but not really for his acting though, because a lot of people love him for the way he does comedy. You know, that's stoic face, mole tao comedy, deliveries. It's always funny. Really makes people laugh out loud all the time. But what they don't realize is that Stephen is actually a very good actor too. In A Chinese Odyssey, after almost half a decade of comedy movies, he wanted to really, you know, get respected as an actor. So in A Chinese Odyssey was an opportunity for him to show some, you know, dramatic chops that he has. And it paid off because those two movies, A Chinese Odyssey Part 1 and 2, won him a lot of awards over, you know, all over Asia, right? Best actor. And I think he did a really good job.
今次大家滿足啦啩！師傅，
原來係悟空，我以為係嚿雨雲添。
One of the Stephen Chow's last movie was CJ7, and that was almost a 100% dramatic movie. And then people, the audience weren't too pleased. And in some ways, I think he is disappointed that, he's not as accepted as a dramatic actor as he is a comedian actor, a comedic actor. But I think, to me, I know Stephen personally, and I know he could be a very serious guy when he wants to, and so, and in fact, he's actually a quite serious guy. And so I hope, he'll be an actor again someday. Right now, he's basically spending 100% of his time behind the camera, but who knows? Maybe when the right script comes along, he will, be in the acting role again.
我唔做馬騮，我要翻去救晶晶。
Stephen Chow in A Chinese Odyssey did a great job as the Monkey King, partly because I think he really identified with the role. He put a lot of himself into it, his own persona, the way he sees life. It's reflected in the Monkey King's character. An example would be in the movie. He loves there are women that he loves, but ultimately he cannot be with them because he has to be a god and not care about the human ways type of thing, right? Now for him, he sees life in a similar way. He cannot have a normal life or a normal relationship with a woman simply because he's a celebrity. And he sees that as a responsibility that he has to bear. And that's all this from my observation, from what I know of him and what I know, we never really had this conversation, but we see his life, and he's dedicated himself in the arts, in entertainment, and he's forgo a lot of things that normal people would have. And so he understands that. And he put all that in the character of the Monkey King. And the ending in A Chinese Odyssey, the way he, expressed himself in the last two scenes is very telling of how he sees the Monkey King as a character. And that's why I think he's so popular and so successful in this role. And I think that's why he carried this with him throughout his whole career after. And that's why he remade the movie again many years after. It's like you can see that throughout his career from 1995 onwards. He's carried this character with him in many ways. And so when he redid The Journey to the West as a director, he carried the same sentimental values of that feeling onto the film. And it's quite sad, actually. It's a dramedy. It's not just a comedy. And I think that's what Stephen Chow is. I think Stephen Chow really identified with the Monkey King character, and the Monkey King character is in him, in life, which is why the movie is so amazing.